Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing an exciting video where I say if you like this movie or TV show, I think you would also like this book, and vice versa. This is a video that I have done a number of times on my channel. I actually have a whole playlist that I will leave linked down below of videos that I've done like this because I love movies and TV shows probably just as much as I love books. And so there's nothing I love more than finding similarities, whether it's in plot or just like with vibes, with, you know, different storylines or different feelings. Like if I get the same feeling from something, I love to find comparisons for these. I also do have a number of different videos where I've done if you like this book, you should check out this book, or if you didn't like this book, you should check out this book instead. There's like a whole bunch of stuff in this playlist, so again, I'll have that link down below if you want to see more videos like this. But before we do jump into the list, I wanted to say a huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. You might have heard me talk about Skillshare before, and you might be familiar with some of their really creative classes like photography, digital art, film and video editing, and different things like that. But Skillshare also has hundreds of career-focused classes as well. I think the new year is the perfect opportunity to start working on your goals and working on yourself. And it's important to remind yourself that no goal is too small and that, you know, it can seem intimidating to try to learn a new skill, but you gotta start somewhere. I think Skillshare is really beneficial for everyone though, because whether you're trying to master skills that you already have or whether you're trying to, you know, learn something new and take on a new skill, I think it's really great because they have so many different class options that there's so many things that you can do with Skillshare. I think Skillshare's creative classes are just really fun in general. Like a lot of their creative writing classes, it helps me and inspires me to want to be more creative as well. But as a content creator, I also really do love their classes that are more focused on content creation. I recently just started taking this class that is called Win Back Your Creative Confidence, and it's part of the Inner Critic series. And this class has been really helpful for me because one of my goals going into 2023 is to be a little bit less critical of myself when it comes to making videos and just try to have more fun with it, because I feel like it really takes the fun out of things when you're your own biggest critic. But of course, you know, if this class in particular does not interest you, they do have so many other classes and so many other topics like advertising, marketing, illustration, photography, video editing. Like the list really does go on. They have something there for everyone. So the first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so that you can also explore your creativity. And thank you so much once again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. And now let's jump into the books. Alright, so the first thing that I have on this list is if you enjoyed the movies The Princess Diaries or What a Girl Wants, which honestly both of these were classics from my childhood, you know, like both of these were top tier, then I think you might like the book Tokyo Ever After. And Tokyo Ever After is a really cute young adult kind of romance book where we're following this young girl who's a Japanese American, and she lives in this small town in Northern California where most of the people there are white. And it's always just been, you know, her and her mom against the world, and then one day she finds out that her father is actually the crown prince of Japan. And then, you know, the story involves her traveling to Japan to meet the father that she never knew that she had, and it's very much like both of these movies where, you know, we follow a protagonist who finds out that her father is a prince or like some kind of royal of some kind, and then she travels to that country and starts to take on the responsibilities of like a princess. It's very, very similar to both of these things, and I just thought this book was so freaking adorable. It's one of those young adult books that just makes you feel all warm and mushy inside, and I kind of love the trope of someone finding out information about their birth parent and then going and like meeting them and like that awkward kind of like beginning of their relationship when they have to get to know each other and they're literally father and daughter. And then my next one is going to be if you like the show Squid Game or if you like the show All of Us Are Dead, which by the way are two of my favorite freaking TV shows of all time, like so top tier, then I think you would like Battle Royale. And yes, if you're wondering, I mean, Battle Royale is probably the OG, so it's like, why would I compare them to these? But they just remind me so much of each other, and I feel like if you've seen these shows and you haven't read the book, then I think you need to read Battle Royale. But also, if you've read Battle Royale and you haven't seen either of these shows, then like, you need to get on it! Because in the story of Battle Royale, we're following these young middle school kids in Japan, and one of their classes will get randomly selected every year to travel to this island where they're just gonna drop off all of these like 40 students and they're gonna fight to the death until only one of them is left standing. And I feel like this was kind of like the OG thing that inspired a lot of things. Like I could compare this to a lot of things, you know, like the Hunger Games or like any kind of dystopian world, but particularly Squid Game. It just reminds me so much of Squid Game because of the nature of like all of them killing each other until there's only one left standing. It just really does remind me of Squid Game. There's also a scene like right at the beginning of this book where when they're being like taken to this island and they get put in these vans and like getting knocked out, and it really reminds me of like those scenes in Squid Game when they're being taken to the Squid Games. And then also I would compare this to All of Us Are Dead just because of the, you know, brutal goriness of like these young kids getting thrown into this like brutal world. You know, if you didn't know, All of Us Are Dead is a Korean TV show on Netflix, and it's about a zombie apocalypse that breaks out when these kids are at a high school, and we kind of follow these high school students as they're left, you know, completely stranded at their high school and they don't have anywhere to go. And so you're just kind of following these teenagers as they're trying to like figure shit out and trying to survive. And I feel like it does remind me so much of that because, you know, in Battle Royale, all of these kids are middle school students and they're just trying to figure out how to survive in this new world they've been thrown into. It just has very similar vibes, I think, to All of Us Are Dead, but the plot is also very similar to Squid Game. So honestly, like if you enjoyed one of these things, I think you should check out all three because all three of them are so top tier for me. I mean, Squid Game was my favorite TV show of 2021, All of Us Are Dead was my favorite TV show of 2022, and then this was in my top 5 books of last year. So I mean, wow, incredible. And then my next one is going to be, if you like the TV show Dexter, then I think you should check out The Butcher by Jennifer Hillier. And so in the story The Butcher, we're following this police chief named Edward Shank, and like 30 years ago, he was famously known for killing the Butcher, which at the time was like Seattle's most notorious serial killer, and he was called the Beacon Hill Butcher. And now we're following his grandson named Matt, who's a chef, and he's going to be working in Seattle, and Edward is going to be retiring and leaving behind his home. And then all of a sudden, they think that the Butcher is like active again in Seattle because there's murders happening that are very similar with what happened with the Butcher like 30 years ago, but they're like, how is this possible? Because they thought the Butcher was dead. And right at the start of this book, it gets revealed to us who the Butcher is. And so it's not any kind of like plot twist or anything to like try to figure out who the Butcher is. It's more of a story of how the Butcher is like working under the nose of like literally everyone, and you're almost kind of like waiting in anticipation, waiting to see if they'll get caught. And I think that's what makes this book so exciting and so different. And I feel like very similarly to Dexter, you know, where we are following the serial killer, you know, because Dexter, in the show Dexter, we're following Dexter, who's a serial killer, and he works in forensics, like in the police. And so it's interesting because the whole like intensity of the show is like waiting people to catch on to the fact that Dexter is the serial killer himself. And so I feel like because of that, they both just have very similar vibes, and I just think they're both so much fun. This book was 5 stars for me. I had such a great time reading this book, and I think knowing who the Butcher was right at the beginning of this book honestly made it even more interesting for me and more fun because it was just like waiting for him to get caught, you know? It was so intense. All right, the next one is going to be, if you like the movie Haunt, then I think you should also check out Cirque Berserk. And so in Cirque Berserk, we're following this group of teenagers, you know, where 30 years ago in their town, there's this carnival where all of these teens were like brutally murdered and like slaughtered at this carnival. And now 30 years later, we're following like a group of teenagers who wants to go back to this carnival, which is currently closed. It's like sealed off to the public, but these teenagers want to go and check it out anyways. And then when they go to the carnival, they realize that things are a little, just a little sketchy. And this is a very short horror novella, by the way, so I don't want to give away too much of like what this is about, but it's kind of like a slasher, but it also has some more to it than just a slasher, you know, like there's a lot more going on in this book and it's really interesting. But I think if you like the idea of like a bunch of teens going somewhere they shouldn't and then things get fucked up, then I think you should check out the movie Haunt, because Haunt is a movie that I watched on Halloween a few years ago and it was absolutely terrifying. And Haunt is kind of also the story about a group of teenagers who they go to this like random haunted house type of place, but it's like some kind of place where like employees work, and then when they go to the place, all of the employees are like wearing clown masks, and it's like very creepy. When they go to this place, they're like required to like leave behind their phones. It's just super shady. And then of course, you know, shit starts to go down once they're in this place, and it is terrifying and creepy. And I just think if you liked the vibes of either of these, I think you could enjoy the other as well. All right, my next one is going to be if you liked the movie King Richard, I think you might also like the book Carrie, Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And the main reason for this comparison is because both of these stories involve tennis players, and when I went into both of these stories, I was not expecting to care very much because I did not think that I cared that much about tennis, and I was kind of like going into these thinking maybe I won't even like them. But King Richard ended up being like a 10 out of 10 movie for me. Like, this movie is so well done. It is so interesting. And if you didn't know, it's actually the true story of, you know, Serena and Venus Williams, and King Richard is their dad. And so the movie's primarily about their dad, and the dad is played by Will Smith. And it's kind of his story about how he got his daughters into tennis and how they ended up becoming champions in tennis. I think the thing that makes King Richard so interesting is because it's really like centered on the family as well, and the family is just so well fleshed out. Like, the characters just feel so real because they are, you know, you can tell it's based off a true story. Whereas with Carrie, Soto is Back, this is a fictional story. It is not a real story, but the character Carrie Soto is also very interesting. She also has a very interesting and complex family, and I think the thing that makes Carrie Soto kind of different from that movie is because Carrie Soto is about, this one's more about like her comeback to tennis. So we do kind of learn a little bit about like her childhood and how she got into tennis, but the main focus of the story is how she's going to be making a comeback to tennis because somebody else has broken her record, and so now she's going to be coming back to take her record back and to have the title of like one of the best tennis players of all time. And so both of these stories, you know, they both involve a lot of tennis. Like, there's a lot of on-screen tennis in King Richard, and there's a lot of written, you know, tennis matches within this book. And to be honest, I just didn't think it would be something that I would care about in either of these stories, and I ended up loving both of them a lot. I do think King Richard is the better of these two, not only because it is based off a true story, but the movie is just so well done. It's incredible. The acting is top tier. I just think it's so freaking good. Whereas this one was really good, but it was like a 4 out of 5 for me. All right, and next up is going to be if you liked the TV show Bates Motel, which is so top tier, by the way, then I think you should check out the Blood on the Tracks manga. This is the only manga that I have on this list, and I'm hoping eventually that I'll be able to read enough manga where I can do a video entirely like this with just manga. But for now, this is what I have because Bates Motel is so creepy. You know, Bates Motel is really known for this creepy mother and son bond that these characters have. If you're totally unfamiliar with Bates Motel, the TV show, it's basically a prequel for the movie Psycho, where, you know, we have Norman Bates and Norma Bates, and they just have a very unique and creepy kind of a mother-son bond. It's almost like romantic at times. It's just kind of like everything about it will just make you look so gross. But Vera Farmiga is incredible, and Freddie Highmore as Norman Bates, he's also incredible, and this is like one of my favorite shows of all time. It's just so good, so well done. And if you enjoyed Bates Motel, I really think you would like this manga series Blood on the Tracks, because as you can see on the cover here, we're also following this mother and son duo in this series, and this series has about 12 volumes out right now. I've only read the first 4 so far, but this series is already giving all of those Bates Motel vibes because this mother and son bond between these two is just one of the most uncomfy things that I've ever read, but it's like one of those stories where you just keep coming back to it. Like, you just want to know, how far is this author going to take this shit? It's just so disturbing, but it's so good. You know, so I feel like if you were also really into Bates Motel and it was something that you just could not pull your eyes away from, then I think you should check this out. And also, if you haven't watched Bates Motel, just do it, okay? Just do yourself a favor and watch it. All right, the next one is going to be if you enjoyed the movie Ready or Not, then I think you should check out The Family Game by Catherine Steadman. Both of these stories are thriller, kind of like horror stories that are about these women who marry into these families, and then their family has some kind of weird game tradition. But I will say the game element of these stories is a lot more prominent in Ready or Not. Like, Ready or Not is basically, the whole story is revolving around this game. And the whole story in Ready or Not takes place on the wedding night. They play this little thing where they're going to try to figure out which game they're going to play, and it lands on like hide and seek or something like that. And she finds out that she's going to have to play this game where she's like fighting for her life the whole night. It is so intense. Like, Ready or Not is one of the most intense movies I've ever seen in my life. I was holding my breath the entire time. Like, it was so freaking good. And I do think Ready Ready or Not is probably better than The Family Game, but if you loved the idea of following a female protagonist who's marrying into this family and then they're kind of like a weird family and they have all these shady weird traditions and games, then I think you should check out The Family Game, because The Family Game was so much fun. I don't think the games were nearly as like big a part of the story as I wanted them to be, but they were still there. This book also takes place right around the holidays, so I think this would be a really good one to read around like Christmas time, because most of this does take place right around Christmas. But yeah, both of these were so freaking good. But Ready or Not, oh my gosh, Ready or Not was just so intense. Right, my next recommendation is gonna be if you liked the movie Don't Worry Darling, and yes, the movie with Florence Pugh and Harry Styles, I think you might enjoy the book Comfort Me with Apples. When I made this connection in my head, I was like, wait, what? Because I was thinking, I was like, you know, that's so cool that, you know, Comfort Me with Apples, like all I can really say about it is that we're following this woman who lives in a world that seems like it's too perfect, or like she doesn't understand why she's not happy, because everybody's like, the world that you're living in is just so perfect, like aren't you just so happy? And she can't figure out why she just has this feeling like things aren't as good as they seem. This one is a horror novella, okay? It's very short. Like that is all you need to know about it before going in, because shit gets crazy real fast. This is actually so similar to Don't Worry Darling, because you know, in that movie we're following Florence Pugh as she's like, you know, almost like a 1950s housewife. She's supposed to be happy, right? She's living in this perfect world. Her husband just goes to work and he takes care of everything for her, and she's just expected to like be a housewife and be happy. She's starting to feel like things are not as perfect as everyone says they are, and that there's something darker like right beneath the surface. And I feel like both of these stories really have those themes in common. I also feel like both of these stories have absolutely shocking endings that will make you want to, you know, completely reread or rewatch whatever you just saw, because it's like, wait, what? And so I love that. I personally enjoyed Comfort Me with Apples quite a bit more than Don't Worry Darling. I think I gave Don't Worry Darling like a 3 out of 5, but Comfort Me with Apples was a 5 out of 5 for me. But I also know that this book is, you know, it's not going to be for everyone, because the plot twist in this book is a little ridiculous. Like, it's wild, it's out there, but I also appreciate it for being able to do those things. So yeah, take from that what you will, but I do think they are very similar. Right, next up is going to be if you like the movie Memento, the absolutely iconic movie that is directed by Christopher Nolan, then I think you might enjoy the book Stay Awake by Megan Golden. I mean, this book definitely had to be inspired by the movie Memento, because this book also directly compares itself to Memento. And if you're totally unfamiliar and you don't know what Memento is, in Memento we're following this protagonist who has lapses with his memory. Like, he has issues with his short-term memory, and so to remember things he starts like tattooing his arms with like things that he needs to remember. And the thing about Memento that is so cool and so unique is that it's a movie that's told backwards. Okay, I know that sounds so freaking confusing, but like the beginning of the movie is actually the end of the story, and then you follow the movie backwards, and so you're seeing it kind of like as this character seeing it, because since he has lapses with his memory, he wakes up in moments and he like doesn't know where he is or what he's doing, and then you as the person watching also feels that way, because he just gets dropped into a scene and you don't know what's going on, just like he does. But then you're slowly starting to put the pieces together as the movie moves along, and it is just genius. It's incredible. Christopher Nolan, poof. And so I think if you like the concept of that, I think you would enjoy Stay Awake, because in Stay Awake this is a thriller where, you know, we're following a protagonist who wakes up in the back of a taxi. She doesn't remember anything, and she goes to her apartment, and then the people at her apartment are like, yeah, you don't live here. And then she goes to try to find her cell phone, and where her cell phone would have been, she finds a bloody knife, and then on her wrist she had written Stay Awake, and so she thinks that something could have happened when she was asleep. There's also this like crime that happened where somebody was like brutally murdered, and then whoever killed that person had left like a message in the window in their blood that looks very similar to the message that she has on her wrist, and so she thinks it might be connected to something that she's done. And I think both of these stories are really interesting because of the fact that we're following a character who has those like short-term memory, like you don't always know what's happening with them. But I do think that Memento is superior in every way. Like, Memento is such a 10 out of 10 movie, whereas this was kind of like a 4 out of 5 book. If you read this book and you thought it was a cool concept and you haven't seen Memento, like, oh, get on it because Memento is so freaking cool. Alright, and then my last recommendation is gonna be if you like the TV show White Lotus, which, oh my god, White Lotus is such a guilty pleasure TV show of mine, I'm obsessed, then I think you would enjoy the book Who is Maud Dixon? Because if you don't know the story of White Lotus, I mean, White Lotus is this TV show on HBO where we kind of follow these like rich people. Most of the time it's like rich white people and they're going on a vacation to somewhere like on a beach, and then it's about how shit really hits the fan and there's usually like murder vibes, but it's like very subtle, you know? I feel like White Lotus is more known for like its dark comedy and like the moody atmosphere than the murder vibes, but the murder vibes are there. The premise of Who is Maud Dixon does remind me quite a bit of White Lotus because in this story we're following this protagonist named Florence, and she's going to be an assistant to this author whose name is Maud Dixon, and this author is like very mysterious and like nobody actually knows who this author is because the pen name is used for Maud Dixon and nobody actually knows. It's like very mysterious, like who is this person? Nobody knows. And so she's gonna be the assistant for this author, and most of the story takes place in Morocco where they're gonna be taking a trip together. And so this one especially reminded me a lot of the second season of White Lotus, because in the second season of White Lotus we also get the situation where there's this woman going on a trip and she brings her assistant, and so there's definitely that like, you know, rich woman with her poor assistant on a trip somewhere on a beach kind of vibe to it. I would also compare the book The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. I also think this one would be kind of comparable to White Lotus because this one also has, you know, a situation where we have two women who are writers and they're both best friends and they're going to be going on a trip to Italy together and staying at this villa, and they're going to be like finish writing their books together. And the thing that this one has like the weird murder vibes to it though is because they discovered that this villa that they're staying in actually was the scene of like a brutal murder that happened in the 70s, and so then it's about how our protagonist starts to become obsessed with like trying to figure out the history of this villa that they're staying in. Just the vibes alone of like being in Italy and kind of having these like shady friends really reminded me of White Lotus. However, I do think White Lotus is superior for either of these books. I feel like these books, they have the vibes, but they're not exactly White Lotus, you know? Like White Lotus is just so freaking top tier, and I actually love White Lotus season 1 and 2. I think both of them are just so solid, and I just really enjoyed how different but also similar they are, and I can't wait to see what they do with White Lotus in the future. But yeah, I would also love to know if you had any other books that you would recommend that you think are similar to White Lotus, because I feel like I do want to read more books that have White Lotus vibes. So if you have any recommendations for me for books that you think have White Lotus vibes, I would love to know. But yeah, those are all of the book, movie, and TV show comparisons that I have for today. I would love to know your thoughts on these videos, and I would love to know if you had any other, you know, books or movies or TV shows that you think could also be comparable to any of these that I mentioned on this list. And once again, if you would like to see another video that's kind of similar to this, then I will have that playlist linked down below. That's my whole playlist of if you like this, check out this type of videos, because I've done so many now. And yeah, thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you very soon with another one. Bye!